The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. When the journalist Tom Wolfe was still young, this was back in the 1960s, one of his first big assignments for Esquire magazine was an article about the custom car culture of Southern California. He spent 4 weeks at an expensive hotel in Los Angeles on Esquire magazine's dime, interviewed car people all over Southern California, took pages and pages of notes, and then he was flattened by a bad case of writer's block. He had piles of ideas and facts and some great turns of phrase, but he just couldn't seem to find the place to start. After weeks of wrestling around with it, he finally gave up. He told his editor, Byron Dobell, that he needed to drop the assignment. As Tom Wolfe put it, Dobell told him just to hand over his notes so they could find a competent writer to make an article out of them. So at about 9 o'clock that night, Tom Wolfe started writing a letter to his editor. Dear Byron, the first place I saw customized cars was at a teen fair in North Hollywood, California. Then he kept writing. He wrote through the night, producing 50 typewritten pages. He sent them over to Esquire magazine in the morning. Later that day, Brian Dobell called to say that he was just going to remove Dear Byron and run the whole letter as the article, The Candy-Colored Tangerine Flake Streamlined Baby. It turned out to be one of the best-known articles of Tom Wolfe's very memorable career. I love that story because it reminds us of the power of letter writing to set us free from a lot of the crippling and egocentric fears and neuroses that shut writers down. A letter strips the writing process all the way down to its essentials. It's just one person telling another person, hello, here are some things I want you to know. That doesn't seem so precious or so daunting as, say, writing an article for Esquire magazine. You can't help but pay attention to your audience because your audience is a person, not an abstraction, not the American public or the donor base or, oh my goodness, is anybody even going to read this blog post at all? I don't write a lot of actual envelope and stamp letters these days, but Reagan Dregge does. Reagan is part of the Habit membership, and in her self-introduction, she mentioned that she has been writing to the same pen pal since she was 11. That fascinated me. I then found out that she carries on quite a bit of correspondence by way of pen and paper, envelope and stamp correspondence. Even when people connect with her online, she sometimes asks if they'd be willing to correspond by mail. One of her colleagues in the Habit membership suggested that I interview Reagan for the Habit podcast, and I thought that'd be a good idea. Reagan Dregge, thank you so much for being on the Habit podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I am really interested. I don't know why it's a shame that this is interesting, but I'm really interested in the fact that you write lots and lots of regular letters with pen and paper, and you put them in an envelope, you put a stamp on them, and you send them to friends, and people send them back. And you've said, even when somebody reaches out to you in some sort of online communication, you'll often say, hey, can we just exchange letters instead of doing it this way?
Yes, I love writing letters.
Tell me about it. How did you get started writing letters?
Well, when I was a little girl, I would probably the first letters I wrote were thank you notes to my grandparents for gifts. And in grammar school or, grade school, you learn how to write a friendly letter. And so I liked reading and writing and drawing. And so I loved to put stuff onto a piece of paper. And then the concept of mail, I don't even remember when I learned about that, but I would write letters to family members mostly. And then when I was a little older, when I was about 11 years old is when I found my first pen pal.
Okay.
My friend Sarah. She lived in Iowa and I lived in Iowa, and we grew up together. And then my family moved all the way across the country to California. And I wanted to stay in touch with her. And so I wrote her a letter, and she wrote back to me. And every time I wrote her a letter, she'd write back. So,
and y'all were 11 when this correspondence started?
Yes. I still have every single one of her letters too.
Really?
I have them in a box. Yep.
And y'all are still writing back and forth. That's
right. Yes. So now I live in Minnesota, and she lives in Nebraska. But we still write letters. We see each other. We try to see each other once or twice a year now that we live nearby. But we have a lot in common. And then we have a lot that is different about our lives. And it's just so great to, develop a friendship that way across a distance. And yet
that's amazing.
Talk about things that can be really intimate and meaningful.
Yeah. My only pen pal was when I was in elementary school. Our class somehow started being pen pals with a class of kids in Minnesota, actually. Wow. So we were in Georgia, they were in Minnesota, and they would write us these letters about how, what the weather was like there. And we would kind of pass them around. Like we would show each other the letters we'd gotten these kids in Minnesota. And like, we think, are they pulling our legs? Surely it's not that, it's April. It can't be that cold. They're lying, right? We all, it was this little glimpse into, I remember it so vividly that it was this glimpse into these kids live in the same country I live in, and things seem so different for them. And they'd say they lived near the Mississippi River, which I thought we thought they might have been lying about that too, because they said they lived on the Mississippi River, but they're in Minnesota, and we couldn't make any sense out of that. And but we were all comparing our letters that we got. It was really, I just really vividly remember it felt like it was opening a new world to me. Although I didn't stick with it like you did, because I don't have the same discipline or something that you seem to have. So tell me about one thing you wrote to me when I was asking you to tell me a little bit about your life in letters. You said that writing letters requires and cultivates patience, courage, and faith. And here are a few more qualities to add to the list: economy, generosity, curiosity, and faithfulness. Can you say more about that? What do you mean when you say that writing letters cultivates patience, courage, and faith?
I think it's important to practice writing, and letters are the way that I practice writing. I write to a particular person on a particular day, and I send it in the mail, and it's slow. So that requires patience, just to sit down and to use real paper and a pen. And collect your thoughts. And so any kind of writing takes patience, but then when it's a letter, you send it in the mail and it takes days to reach the person, usually several days, if not more. And they're reading it at a later time. And then you have to wait for them to reply, and you don't know when they'll reply. It might be a long time or never. There are letters that I send that I never get any reply from. But yeah, and then courage. I think that's a big one for me. I am afraid of what people will think of me and of what I think. And I'm afraid that what I write about won't be good. And so when I write a letter, I'm kind of, it's an act of courage. It's putting my thoughts out in the open for one other person. So it's someone who I at least hope to trust with that. And so I think it's just to even write a letter, you have to be brave. I mean, that action, that's kind of tied into faith too. Is just you're writing, and that's an act of faith to do something, not just to think about it, but to do it.
So the fact that you're writing directly to one person, do you think that's a different kind of courage than, say, a blog post or something that you're putting out to a broader swath of? I mean, say a broad. Who knows? With a blog post, you don't know if 10 people read it or 1,000 or nobody.
Right.
But what do you think? Is that a different? Because I know sometimes you blog. So does that feel like a different kind of courage?
It's similar in a lot of ways. I guess maybe I put a little more expectation into it when I'm writing a letter, because I know it's only going to one person. Yeah. So I could follow up. I could try to follow up with the person if they don't ever respond. Yeah. But I mean, there is another way in which maybe they'll never read it. So maybe you don't have to be afraid.
Yeah. But on the other hand, when I get something in the mail that somebody wrote with a pen, I throw away a lot of mail, but I don't throw those away. I just, when you say the other person might not read it, I think they probably are going to read it.
I guess maybe with a blog, it is really easy to just read it and not ever respond to. That's been my experience. And with a letter, when I get a response, there is sometimes worry, especially if I know that I've written something that I'm worried about what the response would be. If I get a letter back, I might be worried before I even open the envelope.
Yeah. In the world, this sort of digital world where we live, I'm just thinking about the ways that writing a letter is different. And one is, we're so interested in reach when we write in the digital world, and the fact that now you can sort of calculate. I mean, there are now calculations, whether it's here's how many likes you got, here's how many, thumbs down you got, or in the case of, I send out this weekly letter, the Habit Weekly, and I can see, I don't, thankfully I've quit looking, but I can see how many people opened it. I sent it to this many people, and 30% opened it, or 25%. It's amazing that we have now, there are statistics now for how you should feel about how popular or unpopular you are. That used to be kind of a vague sense, and now you can actually have numbers to see, these things. And I love in a letter, you're limited to one like. You're not going to get more than one like, and you're giving up all those statistics, and you're giving up all the aggregation of I don't know what the object of that preposition is, but there's some sort of aggregation that you're giving up and saying, this is valuable. The effort I'm going to here is honoring to this one person. Right. I mean, I think there is, in writing a letter to a person, you are giving up some of the things that we expect writing to do, that we've learned to expect writing to do for us, like for me, the writer. Like I'm serving this reader, and that's one thing I love about what you're doing with your letters.
Yeah, well, maybe because we have the internet and we feel like we're connected to people all around the globe. There's that size of, I don't know, of wanting to reach a larger number of people. But I still think that, writing a letter is a small act. It has more depth, and there's just so much more to it, I think, in a real letter. It's someone wrote it with their hand, usually. And they put your name on it, and they were thinking about you with every word that they wrote, they weren't thinking necessarily about what they were writing. They were thinking about you, who they're writing to, and how to communicate that to you.
Yeah. The written letter focuses you on the truth that you are serving somebody else in your writing. And as I said earlier, I think it is a way of honoring the other person. The very fact that it is inefficient is what's so wonderful about it. And I think inefficiency is so, the writing life, the creative life, if you can't embrace inefficiency, I think you're in the wrong business,
And yet the world is like an abundant place. I can forget that easily. I've been given so much. I guess when I receive a letter, I feel like it's such a gift. Like I want to read it over and over again. Mm-hmm. It's just this tangible friendship, relationship with someone. And it makes me want to give a letter back and write back, like usually the same day.
How do you make time to write these letters? I mean, you're kind of, you're rejuvenating a whole piece of property. Maybe we'll talk about that later. You're raising kids. I mean, how do you manage this?
Well, I guess like any writer, I do have to set like time, make it a priority. I go through seasons of where writing is more of a priority, and then seasons where it's not, and I don't write as many letters. But letters are kind of, in the last few years, even though I've written letters my whole life, the last few years are really when I've started to think of letters as my main writing. When people ask, what do you write? I kind of feel a little embarrassed, but I say, I write letters. And I just think I have to practice, like in a sense, it's practice. I think about the person I'm writing to, of course, and my friendship is at the top when I'm writing to them, but I think it makes my writing better the more that I write. So I need to devote a certain amount of time to writing every day. I don't write every day, but I sometimes will. Like right now it's November, and I am trying to write every day just for the month of November. And I don't write a letter every day. I work on other writing as well. But some days I write a letter as my writing. But the rest of the year, and I'm excited for December to get here, so I don't have to be quite so strict about it. But and then I can focus more on other things too. So My life schedule is I work at home. I homeschool, and we live in an old farmhouse, so there's always something to work on around the house. And so I have a pretty flexible schedule, but it still requires me to set that time aside, which I'm learning how to do better and better every day.
Yeah. Do you ever, when you're sitting there writing a letter to a friend, do you ever have the thought, what I'm writing, right? This is so good, it's too bad that I'm sending it only to one person. Does that thought creep in on you?
I think it does. And I definitely will write the same story in multiple letters to different people. But it's different every time that I write it. It changes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really neat. I've also started keeping a little log, because I write so many, with just a quick description of every letter that I send, like just a one line, so that I have an idea of what I wrote to that person last, so I don't repeat myself too much. But I've received letters that have repeated things to me, and I don't mind. It's kind of fun to hear it again. And it's always going to be different. After time has passed, you tell the story differently. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a great point. And when we get together with our friends, we tell the same stories over and over again.
That's right.
Anyway.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's so good. And because I know that I've had that thought creep in on me, and I think that what a horrible thought. I mean, the thought of, am I wasting this by, I mean, that's such a, I'm embarrassed even to admit that I had this thought, but like, this is, this little anecdote is so brilliant. It's too bad the wider world isn't seeing this. And, I mean, of course, the truth is I write very few letters anymore. Although I do send, emails to one person at a time. But you're inspiring me to get out the pen and paper and write more often. The other thing that I think that the digital culture has taught us to think of ideas and stories and things as being disembodied, right? But what matters is the information, the bits and bytes, not the embodiment of these things. And so the letters that, when you sit down and write a letter and put a stamp on it, put it in an envelope and all those kinds of things, it is a reminder that our stories aren't just information, right? They're embodied. And that's not a question, but you may have some thoughts on it.
Yeah. I don't know what came to mind. I picked up 84 Charing Cross Road, which is about correspondence between someone in New York and someone in England. And you feel like you get to know those two people just through a letter. Like, there's no other real description of their lives, unless you go and look it up on Wikipedia. But you just still, even if you just read that book and those letters going back and forth, there is something human in a letter, that there's more than just the words on the page somehow. The way they write, I mean, their voice.
Do you think, are there ways that 84 Charing Cross Road would be different if those were emails instead of letters?
And then they're reprinted in a book. So I do think a lot about how they were written when I read them. I imagine, what kind of paper, what kind of pen, or are they sitting at a typewriter? I think I imagine the person in London, he works at the bookshop, and I imagine him typing for sure. At a typewriter. And then I look at the dates and I see the speed at which the letters travel to each other. Sometimes there's a week, but sometimes it's longer. Sometimes months go by. And then there's, you just have to fill in everything else with your imagination. But it is slower for sure. I guess somehow that's conveyed in.
Yeah. And I think the slowness also, just makes you a little more thoughtful in the way that you communicate. You are using a stamp. And so maybe you want to put a little more thought into the way you communicate. The fact that you've already slowed down makes you slow down a little bit more, it seems to me, when you're writing a letter instead of an email. Do you read books of letters a lot? Have you read Flannery O'Connor's Habit of Being, for instance?
I have not. It's on my list.
Yeah.
I really want to. I think I've read Tolkien's and I've read C.S. Lewis's Letters to Children. I would be really interested to read more of C.S. Lewis's. I know he's corresponded with other people as well.
Yeah, right. He was very diligent. He was a very diligent letter writer, from what I understand.
Yeah, well, they didn't have email back then, so.
Yeah, I know, but he got so many fan letters that if he had failed to answer them, we would all understand. But apparently, he was very good about answering his letters.
Wow. Yeah, amazing.
And then for Flannery O'Connor, she felt so isolated, and she wasn't. I don't think she was as isolated as we sometimes think of her as being. I think she had. I know a lot of people came by to visit her, but so much of her world was, written in letters. So much of her connection with people who were who weren't local was in the form of letters. And a phrase that she uses somewhere is the idea of there are certain things that just go up and talk, and that when you do have people nearby that you are sort of articulating your ideas to, some of those ideas, instead of being captured on paper, go up and talk. And one of the things I'm grateful for about her life is that so many of the people that she communicated deep things to, she had no choice but to do it on paper. And thankfully those people saved those papers too, right? That's the other thing. Yes. Although who wouldn't save a letter they got from Flannery O'Connor?
I wonder, when you say isolated, you mean like living rurally kind of, or?
Yeah, living rurally and not able to, so she started out her literary life, in the Iowa Writers Workshop, then she moved to New York City, or, then went to Yaddo, Artist Colony or whatever it's called. Lived in New York City for a very brief time, but had literary friendships, which then she had, when she got sick and had to move back to Georgia, she wasn't able to be in the same room with those people very often. And so she was writing letters.
Yeah. And then even depending on where you live and your circumstances, even if you don't have a lot of people around you who are interested in the same things as you, but then you go other places or meet people who are far away, you then have to write a letter to be able to talk about the things that you're passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you live in rural Minnesota. Is that your experience? Is it some of your interests hard to find people who share your interests?
Yes. Although I have lots of friends with other kinds of interests, but not as many.
Sure.
Who love literature and art and writing as much. So I do. I'm very grateful for the friendships that I've developed through writing letters, to be able to share those things, and know that, I'm not the only one who loves it, and to learn and to be able to talk about them, a conversation back and forth on the same things.
Yeah. So I touched on this earlier and said maybe we get back to it. You live on a piece of property that you're trying to sort of bring back to life, to sort of salvage and I want to hear more about that, and then hear how that's, any connections you see between your writing life and your life as a salvager of acreage in Minnesota.
always wanted to live in the country, but I grew up in cities.
Okay.
I think I just love the natural world a lot. And I also love being surrounded by the weather and not being surrounded by as many people. So I appreciate that. I have a deep appreciation for the solitude. And I always wanted to live in the country, and it was 6 years ago now that we found this place and moved here. We lived in town before, but we lived in an old house there too. But we found this old farmhouse on a couple of acres. We have 3.5 acres, and it's about 20 minutes outside of town. There's another small town about 4 miles away from us in the other direction. But the town we go to the most is probably a little bit bigger one. And so I think what we looked for, we wanted something that was old. And my husband, Brett, has worked construction a little bit, but he went to college for technical theater. And he used to build sets at a professional theater. And when we had enough of city life, we decided to move back to the Midwest. And he found work doing something else technical, but not building artistic sets for storytelling. But so we could put our time and talents into doing work around a house, doing projects on a house ourselves. And so we found an old house, and we just started designing a vision for it. I think we also have an appreciation for the story that places tell. There's so many people who've lived here before us. And I think we've just barely started to learn a little bit about the history, because the farmer who owns the land around our property, his parents lived in this house. And so it's really neat, I guess, to feel a little bit attached to the history of a place.
Yeah.
And it was built in 1890, we know. It's a small house, has 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, but it's the right size for us. And we've just kind of been just pursuing that vision of what we would like it to be, a place for people to come and just be able to relax and feel safe and just enjoy life, I guess.
Yeah. I love the way you're talking about your space. The way you talk about your space and what you're doing with it is a reminder that creativity is such a broad idea, right? I mean, you are in your house, in that hospitality that you're shooting for. You're telling a truer story, and that is, I know it's in one sense is related. It's related to your writing, just insofar as in both cases you're telling a truer story than the one the world is telling. And I love that reminder that we think of to think of the arts, and the arts and creativity are not those aren't synonyms, right? In the pie that is creativity, the arts are just one sliver. And I love the way that your whole life is creative,
Yes. They're both
so good on you.
They both start with ideas in your mind and then have to come out and be incarnated, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. Well, and so I'm also hearing in both what you're doing with your house and your property, and in what you're doing with your writing, there's something old fashioned about it, right? You're trying to tie into something that is is a little older than 5 minutes ago.
Yes. They're both slow, right? They take time. And they don't always turn out the way you want them to right away either. You have to work and work and work.
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right. Well, Reagan, I always end these conversations with the question, who are the writers that make you want to write? So I'd love to hear from you. Who are the writers that make you want to put pen to paper?
I always think about this every time you ask. I think the ones that make me want to write are Laura Ingalls Wilder. She lived on the prairie, and in some ways, I feel like a lot of her stories are true memories from her childhood. But I also feel like it's this completely other world. It's nothing like anything I know. And so, I mean, just how simple and different her life is from our modern life today gives me an appreciation for all of those things.
Yeah.
And just the fact that she told those stories, it makes me want to tell stories too.
Yeah.
For people.
Yeah, that's great.
Another one is Annie Dillard. I haven't read all of her books or anything. I've read like 2. And I want to keep reading her for sure. Yeah. But I think one thing she says is that we were put here to give voice to our own astonishment. And that's just what I want to do. I want to give voice to what astonishes me in the world. So, and just the way that she's astonished by things, I think is really inspiring to me. And then Marilyn Robinson is another one. Just the way that she talks about people. I mean, the way that each of her books, the Gilead series, is distinct, and they're also gentle in their own way. The characters give each other grace and receive it just over and over and over again until you start to just believe in grace, I think.
Yeah, that's good.
And the last one, it would be the writers who make me want to write are the people who write me letters. I want to write back when I get a letter.
Yeah.
It gives me so many new thoughts and ideas and questions to ask.
Yeah.
And the people who take that risk to possibly fail, or even just to admit that they failed, but that they tried again.
Yeah. Hey, can I ask you a quick question about that?
Yes.
How do you fail as a letter writer?
That's a really good question. I guess you don't quite finish maybe the letter. People, I mean, people are always apologizing for their handwriting to me. And there's so many things we can apologize for, but I'm so happy to get a letter. I don't mind.
I know that's the thing. It's and I wish we'd gotten to this earlier in the conversation because I think it's really hard to fail at letter writing because so many people are so glad to get a letter, and I think that you said that writing a letter is an exercise in courage, but it also gives you courage, but because you know that. Because it's so relational, what matters is the relationship, not your ability to be articulate or smart or come up with beautiful figurative language or all those things. None of those things matter very much compared to the fact that you just wrote a letter and that you connected with somebody and then they loved it. Yeah. And so I think that's what excites me. Now that I'm thinking about it, that's what excites me most about letter writing is that people are just so glad to get it, that it's it gives you a lot of courage, you know?
Yes.
And as you said, we apologize all the time in our letter, but
yes,
we don't need to, because people are just glad to get it.
yes.
All right, Reagan, thank you for these great reminders about letter writing. I think people will be very inspired to sit down and write a letter from hearing you talk. So thanks.
I hope so.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.